Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back to a world of candlelight and cathedrals where beauty was judged not by gym routines or Photoshop filters, but by the strange, sacred, and sometimes shocking standards of medieval Europe. You find yourself walking the cobblestone streets of a 13th century town, the scent of hearth fires and sheep's wool on the wind, and you catch sight of a noblewoman stepping from a carriage, her silhouette unlike anything modern fashion would celebrate. Her body is not sculpted like a runway model's, nor lean like a dancer's, but soft, curvaceous, and almost ethereal in its presentation. And somehow, that was perfection. In fact, if you looked like a 21st century Instagram influencer back then, you probably wouldn't survive the century socially, at least. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're seated in the great hall of a stone manor warmed by a roaring hearth. The tapestries on the wall depict saints and sinners, battles and births. But your gaze keeps drifting to the women moving through the room. Draped in flowing gowns, their shapes hidden, then revealed, then hidden again with every graceful step. To truly understand what made a woman beautiful in the Middle Ages, you first have to leave behind your modern notions of health, fitness, or personal choice. Here, everything about a woman's appearance, her hair, her weight, even the way she smelled was bound up in her morality, her virtue, her class, and her fertility. The ideal female body wasn't just a matter of style. It was a signpost. It pointed to whether she came from good stock, whether she was marriageable, and whether she carried the air of heavenly virtue or sinful temptation. You hear the clink of goblets and the low hum of lute music. You're surrounded by layers of social expectation. And in this layered world, the ideal female figure was often soft and rounded. A full belly and ample hips weren't just tolerated, they were revered. To be plump was to be prosperous. Only the wealthy could afford to eat richly enough to gain weight. So to have curves was a luxury. A round face, delicate and noble. Pale skin that meant she stayed out of the sun like a proper lady should. But there's more. In the early medieval period, think 10th to 12th centuries, Christian ideals played an enormous role in shaping the body image of the time. Women were seen as temptresses, descendants of Eve, and the church warned men of the dangers of lust. And yet, paradoxically, the beauty of a woman was also seen as a glimpse of the divine. This tension meant that while women were encouraged to dress modestly, their physical beauty, especially when properly soft and gentle, was still prized as a kind of spiritual gift. You see it in illuminated manuscripts, those delicately painted books filled with gold leaf and saints. The women in the margins have soft necks, gentle cheeks, downcast eyes. No harsh angles, no bulging muscles. Instead, everything is curved, fluid, subdued. As you wander through this mental gallery, you notice something else: posture. Medieval beauty had a very specific way of holding itself. Sloping shoulders, bowed heads, long necks. There's a sense of vulnerability to it, a display of femininity that leans away from strength and towards softness, passivity, even fragility. Women were expected to appear mild and yielding, not assertive or confident. The ideal figure wasn't necessarily about sexual appeal, it was about symbolism. A woman's body was a mirror of her soul, her family's honor, her social class, and her reproductive potential. And this meant that as fashion shifted from Romanesque simplicity to Gothic extravagance, so too did the body ideals tucked inside every seam. You're now in a cloistered garden, watching noble women stroll under the moonlight. You hear the whisper of silk and linen, the hush of skirts brushing stone. The dresses they wear conceal most of their bodies, but the fit tells you what lies beneath. High waists and long flowing lines give the illusion of height and grace. These clothes weren't just for modesty, they were sculpting tools shaping the viewer's perception. A tiny waist not always required. Instead, the illusion of elongation and gentle curves was the goal. But among peasants, things were different. In the village fields, women didn't have time to worry about poetic silhouettes. Their bodies were shaped by hard labor, childbearing, and hunger. And yet, even among the working class, there were still beliefs about what made a woman beautiful. Youth, of course, was valued, but so were rosy cheeks, clear skin, strong hips for childbearing, and the absence of disease or deformity. Even if you were covered in layers of wool and grime, if you had symmetrical features and moved with grace, people noticed. The bells of the abbey begin to chime. You pause in your wanderings. Behind you, the shadow of a nun crosses the courtyard. Here in the convent, the body ideal was erased. Cloistered women wore loose robes, cut their hair, and denied their flesh. In these walls, beauty wasn't about form at all, it was about the soul. And yet, even among the most devout, there were still whispers. Stories of women so lovely that angels appeared at their deathbeds. Even holiness could not fully banish the allure of physical form. You start to notice a pattern. From the castles to the cottages, from the convent to the courts, the female body was always being interpreted. It was never just a body. It was a canvas of meaning. Every pound, every shade of skin, every feature meant something. Whether you were beautiful or not wasn't just a personal matter. It was a judgment passed on you by men, by the church, by society, and sometimes even by yourself. So you keep walking. You pass through villages across moors, through candlelit parlors and muddy stables, and in each place you begin to gather pieces of the ideal. It is a figure of gentleness and curves, of restraint and suggestion. It hides as much as it reveals. It changes with the seasons, the rulers, the fashions, but it never disappears. And so with the first whispers of this night's journey behind you, you take a breath and prepare to step deeper into this strange and sleepy world of medieval beauty. You step through a narrow stone archway into the heart of a medieval city, where the marketplace hums with life vendors calling out prices, pigs squealing under carts, the scent of yeast and sweat thick in the summer air. And yet even in this chaotic bustle, standards of beauty persist like invisible laws. You can feel them in the way women walk, the way they tie their hair back with ribbons or cover it entirely beneath linen veils. You notice how the ideal female body seems to shift depending on where you look. Among the nobility, beauty is a performance. Among the peasants, it's a practicality. You find yourself near a merchant's stall that sells imported fabrics, velvets, damasks, and finely dyed wools. A wealthy woman, perhaps the wife of a lord or guildmaster, lifts her chin as she inspects the bolts of cloth. Her face is pale intentionally, so almost ghost-like. This wasn't a result of poor health, it was deliberate. Fair skin meant you didn't labor outdoors, that you were noble by birth, or at the very least, well kept. A sun-tanned complexion. That was the mark of a field worker, someone expendable. So women went to great lengths to maintain their pallor, even applying mixtures of lead and vinegar to bleach their skin, ironically, risking disfigurement in the pursuit of perfection. And then there's the hair. You notice the merchant's wife wears her hair tightly braided beneath a fillet, and barbette, a kind of headgear that wraps around the chin and over the head. In many medieval cultures, especially Christian Europe, a woman's uncovered hair was seen as dangerously seductive. It could distract men, lead them astray. So young maidens might wear their hair down in waves, signaling purity and availability, while married women were expected to hide their locks altogether. The beauty of a woman's hair was both admired and feared. It framed the face softened features and could hint at wildness, sensuality, or humility, all depending on how it was worn. But hair wasn't just about virtue. Its color mattered too. Blonde hair, particularly the golden sunlit blonde that looked almost ethereal in candlelight, was considered the most beautiful. It was associated with angelic figures and often emphasized in religious art. If a woman wasn't naturally blonde, she might try to become one. Recipes for homemade hair lighteners circulated quietly, mixes of saffron ash and lye applied under the sun. Risky, painful, but worth it if it meant appearing like a living saint. You follow her down a stone lane past the butcher and the baker until the smell of blood fades and the scent of spices takes over. She walks gracefully with deliberate steps. Her gown, long, heavy, and expensive, is shaped to enhance her body in very specific ways. The medieval dress wasn't just clothing, it was architecture. Long fitted bodices emphasized a narrow upper torso even if the woman wasn't particularly slim. The skirts flared out, creating the illusion of wider hips and a fertile lower body. This was the age before corsets, but that didn't mean women weren't shaping their figures. Clothing was a visual whisper. I'm well fed, I'm fertile, I'm of high status. But it was never meant to scream. You didn't show cleavage. You didn't wear bright lipstick. The eroticism was subtler, layered in silk and symbolism. Sometimes it was just the way a sleeve draped off the wrist, or how tightly a belt sat at the curve of the waist. You pass a beggar now, a woman cradling a child, her face sunburnt and her arms lean from work. She is beautiful in a different way, ruddy cheeks, strong calves, eyes alert and intelligent. In the countryside, beauty often looked like health and strength. The plumpness idealized by nobles was irrelevant here. What mattered more was whether a woman could carry a bundle of hay, churn butter, survive childbirth. You make your way toward the city church, where a sermon is just letting out. People spill into the square. You hear murmurs of sin and salvation, reminders that vanity is dangerous. And yet inside that same cathedral are paintings of the Virgin Mary portrayed with impossibly delicate features, soft curves, and downcast eyes. She is pure, yes, but also profoundly beautiful. And you realize something: beauty in the medieval mind wasn't just carnal or cosmetic, it was theological. A beautiful woman was seen as evidence of divine favor. Her body was a spiritual canvas. You glance up at one of the stained glass windows and see it again, the same features repeated over and over. High, rounded foreheads, narrow chins, tiny pursed mouths. Some women even plucked their hairlines to achieve that high domed look, believing it made them resemble angels. Eyebrows were thinned or removed. Cheeks were lightly tinted with natural rouges, sometimes derived from crushed berries or even bugs. Everything was intentional, but rarely bold. Then, as you drift further through the city, you begin to notice that beauty wasn't static. It changed with the winds of fashion, religion, and politics. In the 12th century, during the height of the chivalric age, the female ideal became even more ethereal. Inspired by courtly love literature, women were painted in verses as untouchable divine beings. Knights wrote poems about their beloved's white hands, swan-like necks, and dainty steps. The ideal body became more and more impractical, an abstraction of femininity rather than a celebration of the real. You feel the weight of these expectations settling around you. Imagine being born into a world where your worth, your morality, and even your soul were measured by the curve of your wrist or the slope of your shoulders. A world where your face was a battlefield between sin and sanctity. Every glance a judgment, every garment a declaration. And still, women found power within it. You pass by a guild hall where a woman leans over parchment, sketching a garment pattern. She is a dressmaker, an artist in thread, and through her work she shapes not only fabric, but the bodies that wear it. In her hands, the ideal is stitched and hemmed into being. She knows how to draw the eye, how to create grace from linen. She is not just following trends, she is writing them. And you realize something else. Despite the constraints, despite the rigid ideals, women were not simply passive recipients of beauty standards. They manipulated them, adapted to them, and sometimes defied them entirely. Just beneath the surface of every ideal was a clever adjustment, a quiet rebellion or a whispered truth. The street begins to quiet. Candles are lit in windows. The city exhales, and you, now fully immersed in this strange yet intimate world, begin to see not just the shape of the ideal medieval woman, but the forces that shaped her. Forces that went far beyond flesh and bone. Forces you'll continue to uncover as the night deepens. You step into a noble woman's chamber just as the first stars blink into the twilight sky. The room smells faintly of lavender and beeswax. A servant moves quietly in the corner, folding freshly washed linens, while the lady herself stands before a polished brass mirror. You watch as she dabs a faint mixture of herbs and ground pearls across her cheeks, a cosmetic blend meant to brighten the skin and suggest youth, nobility, and health. There's no such thing as makeup in the modern sense, but make no mistake, these are calculated enhancements. In a world where outward appearance reflects inward virtue, the way a woman presents her body is more than vanity, it's survival. The lady adjusts her sideless surcoat, a sleeveless outer garment worn over a tight-fitting kirtle. The gown's wide openings at the sides reveal the curving lines of her waist and hips, subtly, modestly, and yet with undeniable intent. She is not displaying her body for pleasure. She's sculpting an image. In this era, the ideal female form isn't naked, it's clothed with meaning. The long lines of the dress elongate her frame, and the gathered fabric at her waist gives the illusion of fullness, below implying fertility, a concept so woven into the medieval body ideal that it touches every layer of fabric. You begin to understand that clothing wasn't just about modesty, it was about shaping perception. And when perception is power, the body becomes political. You sit quietly near the hearth, watching the flicker of flame across the polished stones as she takes a seat with needlework in hand. A young maid sits beside her, learning how to hold the embroidery hoop just so. The elder woman leans in, correcting her posture, and you notice again the way a woman's body is expected to perform not just tasks, but grace. Her movements are soft, slow composed, never hurried or brash. The ideal woman must never seem rushed. She must not sweat or stumble or speak too loudly. Even physical comportment was part of the ideal. Your body was always being read. Even how you ate mattered. Thinness, while now often associated with beauty, was not particularly prized among the elite. In fact, being too thin was seen as a sign of poverty, illness, or spiritual torment. A woman who was too slender might be assumed to be ill with consumption, melancholia, or moral weakness. A bit of roundness suggested health, good food, warmth in winter, and the ability to survive childbirth. To look well-fed was to appear blessed. But make no mistake, this wasn't freedom. It was simply a different kind of constraint. You pass a carved wooden chest, and run your fingers along its edges, lifting the lid just slightly. Inside are perfumed sachets, dried rose petals, and small ivory combs. Personal hygiene in the medieval world was inconsistent but not absent. Women used lavender water rose oil and sage to clean themselves. They didn't bathe daily, but they did care about scent. A woman who smelled sweet was considered pure. One who did not, well, it could damage her entire reputation. Even scent was tied to status. As you move into the adjoining room, you notice a pile of books, illuminated manuscripts, written in Latin and Old French. On one of the pages, a drawing depicts a figure of Eve, the biblical first woman, with soft breasts and wide hips, her hands delicately placed across her chest. Her stomach is rounded, not flat. Her body is maternal symbolic. And suddenly it hits you, the ideal female body in medieval times wasn't supposed to be autonomous. It was supposed to belong to someone else. To a man, to a child, to God. You're led down the hallway toward a room that smells of parchment and beeswax. It's the private scriptorium of the household priest who writes letters for the family and occasionally copies texts by hand. He gestures to a series of illustrations in a manuscript, depictions of saints and noble ladies. They all share similar features: gentle chins, slightly sloped shoulders, long fingers, small, delicate feet. These were not portraits, they were ideals. And then the priest begins to speak about humors. In medieval medicine, the body was thought to be governed by 4 humors: blood phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Women, it was believed, had cooler, wetter constitutions than men. This made them more passive, more nurturing, and more emotional. These beliefs weren't just medical, they shaped how people interpreted the female form. A woman who was too hot-tempered was said to have too much yellow bile. A woman who was sluggish might be too phlegmatic. Even a woman's body type was said to reflect her personality, her morals, her suitability for marriage. And that's the crux of it. The female body in this era was never seen as neutral. It was always being translated, assigned meaning. You weren't just a woman, you were a symbol. As you leave the priest's study, the hallway opens into the main hall once again. You're surrounded now by an evening gathering, servants lighting candles, nobles chatting in low tones. You look around and see how every woman here is balancing that tightrope between visibility and virtue. To be too beautiful was dangerous. It drew attention, temptation, gossip. To be too plain was equally risky. It could imply poverty, dullness, or even sin. The perfect balance was elusive. A woman had to be attractive enough to secure a good marriage, but not so striking as to appear prideful or impure. You pass a spinning wheel still warm from use, and think of the countless hours women spent crafting cloth spinning stories and holding entire households together while being judged not just for their work, but for their waistlines. You think of all the ways they tried to control the uncontrollable, applying pale powders, plucking hairs, tying belts tight, even eating certain foods in hopes of shaping their bodies toward the ideal. And yet even through the weight of these expectations, there is strength. You see it in the way they walk, the way they adapt, endure, survive. The medieval beauty ideal may have tried to box them in, but women found cracks in the structure, little openings where they could breathe, grow, and sometimes even rewrite the rules. The candles burn lower, shadows grow longer, and your journey into the depths of medieval beauty continues one quiet step at a time. The candlelight casts flickering halos on the stone walls as you follow the quiet rhythm of evening winding down. You step into a modest bedchamber tucked in the upper level of the manor, where the air smells of dried herbs and wool blankets. A young woman sits on a carved wooden stool, brushing her long, wavy hair by the open window. Her reflection shimmers faintly in the darkened glass. Outside, the world slumbers under a soft blanket of stars, but inside she's thinking about her face, her waist, her posture, whether she matches the ideal, whether others see her the way they're supposed to. She's not noble, not quite. Her family is well off enough to afford tutors and tailored gowns, but not so wealthy that she's above the whispers of judgment. Her body is not entirely her own. It belongs to her family's reputation, to the man she will marry, to the eyes of the church. She is watched even when alone. As she braids her hair, you notice the precision. Every motion has been practiced. Every tuck and twist designed not just to neaten, but to express virtue, modesty, control. Hair was a statement, especially when you couldn't display much else. And even in its concealment, it communicated status, age, even marital eligibility. The room around her is sparse but carefully arranged. A chest with a few treasured items, a small polished mirror, a pouch of ground rose petals, an ivory comb, a needle kit. These are her tools, not of seduction, but of conformity. These allow her to raft the ideal, not chase it. And here's the thing that startles you: she isn't vain. The world has made her believe that beauty is a duty. To be attractive, yes, but also to appear honest, devout, and useful. If she is too beautiful, she risks accusations of pride or temptation. If she is not beautiful enough, she may go unmarried, considered unworthy. It's not about indulgence. It's about survival. You move softly past her and back into the manor's long hallway. Tapestries line the walls, most woven with religious scenes, but some depict courtly love, men and women locked in eternal glances, exchanging tokens of affection. These women, embroidered with such care, all look remarkably alike, narrow-shouldered, long-necked, pale-faced. You start to realize that the ideal female body wasn't just imagined in the mind. It was stitched into fabric, carved into wood, sung in verse, etched into glass. The entire culture repeated these signals until they seemed eternal. But even so, beauty was always evolving. As the centuries rolled forward, fashion began to tighten its grip. You find yourself now in the 14th century, when the Gothic era is in full bloom. Clothing has shifted. Gowns are more fitted sleeves, more exaggerated, and waists belted higher. The Gothic silhouette becomes the new standard of elegance. Long, slender torsos are idealized, and dresses are tailored to elongate the female figure. To meet the ideal, women wear tighter underdresses known as kirtles to shape the body beneath their gowns. Though corsetry in the modern sense hasn't emerged yet, belts and bodice fastenings serve a similar function. Sculpting emphasizing concealing. The goal is to appear tall, willowy, and softly curved at the hips. Sturdiness is no longer ideal. Feminine beauty is now about delicacy, refinement, and a kind of visible restraint. And yet physical weakness was not the goal. Women needed to survive pregnancies, keep households running, and if noble, occasionally act as political pawns or even regents. So the body was expected to appear fragile while actually being quite strong. A contradiction, but one enforced with quiet insistence. You find yourself at the edge of a small chapel now, where a noble bride is kneeling before her wedding ceremony. Her gown is pale blue, trimmed with fur, and embroidered with tiny symbols of purity and faith. Her waist is girdled with a golden cord, and her hair is tucked beneath a delicate veil. She looks serene, but her stillness is rehearsed. This moment, the way she kneels, the way her hands are folded, is not just a religious rite. It's a visual demonstration of virtue. She must appear graceful, passive, untouched. Her body, though soon to be given to a husband, must look like it has never known want, labor, or rebellion. Her very posture is proof of her worth, and the expectations don't end at the altar. Once married, a woman's body becomes something else entirely. Now it must bear children, preferably boys. It must endure confinement and pain loss and bleeding, all with the appearance of gentleness. Her figure will change, and society will judge those changes. If she grows too wide, she may be whispered about. If she remains too slender, there will be questions about her fertility. A woman could never quite win. You drift into the manor kitchen, where the cooks are cleaning up the remnants of the evening feast. Here you notice a different kind of woman. Her hands are calloused, her arms strong, her face flushed from hours by the hearth. She's laughing, tossing a crust of bread to a dog at her feet. And despite the soot on her cheeks, there's beauty here too, raw, unfiltered, practical. Even in the servant class, there were ideals. Not as heavily enforced, perhaps, but still present. A good maid was expected to be neat, modest, and well put together, a term that meant something far more literal than today. Hair tied, apron clean, gestures polite. Strength and stamina were admirable, but only if paired with humility and a pleasant face. You lean against the doorframe, watching the scene unfold, so many different bodies, all living within the boundaries of their time, shaped by expectations, praised or punished, based on appearances often out of their control. And still you sense the resilience behind every movement. There's a quiet defiance in the way some women hold their heads, in the way they tie their belts, in how they tuck away their most striking features. Not because they are ashamed, but because they understand the game. They play by the rules, but only just enough. The fire dims low, the night deepens, and your journey continues deeper into a world where beauty was currency, burden, and secret language all at once. You awaken in the soft hush of dawn, the world outside your chamber window cloaked in mist. The manor is still, save for the distant clatter of a servant hauling firewood. As you rise and begin to walk the quiet corridors, you find yourself drifting back through everything you've seen so far, the tightly laced gowns, the powdered faces, the tucked chins, the way the female body in medieval times was molded by invisible hands. And now it's time to follow those hands beyond the manor walls into the realm of art, poetry, and prophecy, where the female form wasn't just admired or corrected, it was immortalized. You step into a cathedral gallery where the walls stretch high above your head, painted with biblical scenes and allegorical women. These women are not real, and yet they've shaped reality for centuries. You gaze upward at a fresco of the Virgin Mary, her eyes soft, her skin pale, her robe draped in folds that suggest fullness without sensuality. She embodies what painters called pulchritudo animae, the beauty of the soul. This was one of the most enduring ideals in medieval thought, that external beauty mirrored inner virtue, and the closer a woman looked to the Virgin, the more pure she was believed to be. Round cheeks, down-turned eyes, gentle hands, soft lines. Not too much definition, not too much presence. A woman was beautiful when she didn't dominate the room, when she was the vessel, not the flame. But the walls tell more than one story. In a corner illuminated by stained glass, you notice another depiction, a woman from a tale of courtly love. She's everything the Virgin is not draped in crimson, her lips slightly parted, her gown clinging to a narrow waist and full hips. This woman, perhaps Isolde or Guinevere, reflects the romantic ideal. Men sang songs about her. Poets compared her to roses and moons. Her beauty wasn't holy, it was haunting. And yet both women, the chaste Madonna and the dangerous seductress, were bound by the same rules. Their beauty was not their own. It was framed, filtered, and assigned meaning by the men who told their stories. You stroll through the gallery until it gives way to a cloister garden. Here, a nun kneels beside a rose bush, clipping herbs with quiet focus. Her face is bare, her hair hidden beneath a coif, her figure lost in the folds of a plain wool robe. And yet, there's an elegance to her stillness. In the cloister, the body ideal is erased, or at least rewritten. Beauty is not a social currency here. It is something to be tamed, denied, sublimated into prayer. But even among nuns, beauty was not ignored. In some convents, records describe women using rose water to soften their skin or brushing their hair before covering it. Not for seduction, but for order, discipline, reverence. To present the body, even in obscurity, as something cared for. You walk alongside her now through the garden paths, and she tells you something that lingers in your mind. The soul is the garden, and the body is its gate. In those few words, you hear echoes of a whole worldview, that a woman's exterior was both invitation and boundary. To be admired, but never touched. Desired, but never heard. And you realize something uncomfortable, silence itself was a form of beauty. You leave the garden and descend into the library, where monks and scribes copy manuscripts by hand. One illuminator shows you a bestiary, a book of animals real and mythical, each symbolizing a human trait. He points to the image of a unicorn and smiles. You know, he says, they say unicorns can only be tamed by virgins. That's how pure their bodies are. Even in myth, the ideal female body was imagined as something magical and morally loaded. Virginity especially was exalted not just as a status, but as a state. A girl's untouched body was a symbol of perfection. But once crossed, that line could not be retraced. One mistake, one whispered rumor, and her beauty could become suspect, less a gift and more a weapon. And yet, even as you hear these tales repeated by monks and minstrels alike, you start to see the cracks in the ideal. You read a poem by a woman who describes her aging hands with pride, another who celebrates her wide hips and thick arms as the marks of motherhood. These voices, quiet, handwritten, and often forgotten, tell a different story, that the body is not just for looking at. It's for living in. You exit the library into the courtyard, where a group of girls are playing with a ball. Their laughter fills the air, and for a moment the ideals disappear. They run freely, hair unbound arms, swinging dresses lifted above their ankles as they chase the game. In their motion, you see a glimpse of something truer than any painting or poem. The ideal isn't frozen in a pose or trapped in a manuscript. It moves, it breathes, it changes. And suddenly you realize the beauty standards weren't just about control. They were also about fear of aging, of power, of independence. A body that didn't conform threatened to unravel the entire structure. And so the ideal was a cage dressed as a crown. But not everyone wore it willingly. As you turn back toward the manor, the bell tolls softly in the distance. And you prepare to descend further into the whispered rebellions, the quiet refusals, and the many ways women shaped their bodies to survive a world that wouldn't let them own them. The bell fades into silence as you step through the manor's rear gate and onto the muddy path that winds toward the edge of the village. Here, the grandeur of noble halls gives way to thatched roofs and earthen floors. You're among the people now, the ones history often overlooks. And yet it's here among the peasant women hauling water-mending nets and tending goats that the ideal female body takes on its most practical form. A young woman passes you with a basket on her hip. Her gait is sure, her arms muscular, her skin freckled from sun exposure. She is not pale. She is not soft. She is not delicate. But she is beautiful, just not in the way the poets write. Her beauty is in her function. in the ease with which she balances that basket, in the way she lifts her skirts just enough to keep them clean as she trudges through the muck, in the laughter she shares with the baker's daughter as they exchange news. Among the working-class ideals were shaped less by religion or poetry and more by survival. Wide hips meant successful childbirth. Thick thighs meant strength. Sturdy hands meant skill. The body was valued for what it could do, not how it could be adorned. A plump figure still suggested health and prosperity, but here that plumpness was seasonal, fleeting. It came after a good harvest and vanished by the end of winter. And yet, even in this world of necessity, women weren't free from aesthetic judgment. A gossiping neighbor might remark that a girl with too much color in her cheeks was either too wild or too flirtatious. A widow who stayed thin and sprightly too long after her husband's death might raise suspicions. Here, too, the body was a signpost. It was constantly read by others, and often misread. You walk past a small window and hear a mother lecturing her daughter. She's advising her to keep her chin tucked, her walk demure, her voice low. "Don't call attention to yourself," the mother warns. "Let the right man notice you, not every man." The girl nods, absorbing the lesson. She doesn't yet realize how many more will follow. How many rules will be whispered in kitchens handed down with the bread and salt. You step into a candlelit alehouse next, where the atmosphere is looser, rowdier. Here, women move differently. Barmaids weave through tables with trays balanced on one-hand hips, swaying just enough to draw a glance, but not too much to invite trouble. Their clothing clings a little more, not by design, but by sweat and wear. Their hair spills out of hastily tied scarves. They are performing a different kind of beauty here, one that plays at freedom while still answering to expectation. One woman leaning against the counter catches your eye. Her sleeves are rolled up. Her smile is crooked. Her arms are flecked with flour. She laughs deeply, unapologetically, and you see in her a power that isn't written in any courtly manuscript. She knows she's being watched, but she watches back. Her body might not fit the ideal, but it commands the room anyway. You follow her outside as she steps into the cool night air, lighting a lantern to walk home. She tells you that in her youth she tried to match the ladies in the tapestries. She drank herbal teas, meant to make her skin glow, bound, her stomach tighter, plucked her brows thinner. But the labor of her life refused to conform. Eventually, she learned not to fight it. "Let them sing songs about lilies and swans," she says with a shrug. "I've got a goat to milk." And yet, despite her dismissal, even she admits to feeling the pressure when she walks into church on Sunday. Surrounded by lace-trimmed gowns and watchful matrons, she tucks in her hair just a little tighter, walks just a little straighter. We all carry the echo of the ideal even when we pretend not to. You pass a healer's hut next, where the scent of rosemary and thyme drifts from the windows. Inside, a woman crushes roots into powder, murmuring softly as she works. She's old, at least 60, but her back is still straight, her gaze still sharp. She speaks of body ideals, not as truths, but as symptoms. They change with the wind, she says. But the body doesn't lie. It tells its own story. She shows you a bundle of herbs meant to balance the blood used by young women who fear they're too thin or too flushed or too slow to attract a husband. Even here in the quiet realm of healing, women seek to alter themselves, sometimes for beauty, sometimes for survival, and sometimes because no one ever taught them how not to. As you step back into the open, the sky has darkened to indigo. A few stars shimmer through the clouds. You hear laughter down the lane, two girls skipping stones across a shallow stream. Their voices rise unbothered, still untouched by judgment. And for a moment, you wonder how long they have left, before the world begins telling them what their bodies should be. You walk slowly now, absorbing all the contradictions. In noble halls, in village huts, in taverns and churches, the female body was a constant stage. And yet, despite centuries of rigid ideals, no two women lived it the same way. Some conformed, some resisted. Most did both quietly, invisibly, day after day. And as you reach the edge of the village, the wind picking up through the trees, you begin to sense that the real medieval beauty wasn't found in the paintings or poems at all. It was in the spaces in between, in the tension, in the choices, in the women who carried these expectations and still found a way to walk upright. The night deepens. The path continues. And so does your journey into the strange, shifting world of the ideal female body. The wind rustles through the trees as you follow a narrow dirt path that leads away from the village, curling around the edge of a monastery garden. The world feels quieter here, hushed by reverence and ritual. You pass rows of cabbages, lavender bushes, and a low stone wall where two novices are bent in prayer. Their habits obscure every trace of form, no curve, no color, no hint of the body beneath. And that's the point. In these sacred spaces, the female body is meant to disappear. You pause beneath the eaves of the chapel and listen to the chants echoing from within. Monks, not nuns this time, but even their songs speak of beauty, not earthly beauty, but divine perfection. And yet the metaphors they use are strikingly physical. Her neck like a tower of ivory, her breasts like twin fawns. The imagery of the Song of Songs, one of the most quoted biblical texts of the time, blurs the line between holiness and sensuality. Even here, in the most ascetic of places, the female form refuses to be erased. It reappears in every hymn and every carved Madonna. You step inside the chapel, and your eyes adjust to the dim candlelight. Stained glass saints look down with serene faces, all shaped to match the ideal of humility. Sloped eyes, small mouths, narrow faces. A statue of Mary gazes downward, arms open in submission, body hidden beneath flowing robes. This was the safest way to display beauty, cloaked quiet and removed from desire. But step back into the world, and desire returns quickly. You walk now toward a bustling market town where the wealthy and the aspirational gather. You pass a merchant's daughter perched on the edge of a fountain, her gown trimmed in green and gold, her waist cinched with an embroidered sash. She knows eyes are on her. She's been trained to carry herself just so. Not because she's vain, but because her beauty is a form of capital. It may win her a better match, a better life. And so she perfects the angle of her neck, the length of her stride, the softness of her voice. She is not alone. Everywhere you look, girls are watching each other, measuring, adjusting, learning the codes. How to walk with grace. How to laugh without baring too many teeth. How to occupy space without appearing bold. The ideal isn't just enforced by men. It is passed from mother to daughter, sister to sister, reinforced in every glance and every compliment. You look pale today, a praise. You've filled out nicely a compliment, if said with the right tone, a warning if said with the wrong one. And then there are the fashion manuals. Yes, they existed, though not quite as glossy as the ones on your modern bookshelf. You find one in the corner of a merchant's home, its pages handwritten and decorated with tiny drawings of dresses and accessories. These books were guides to comportment, appearance, even body shape. They advised women on how to move, how to drape fabric to flatter their figure, how to maintain modesty while still being appealing. The ideal form suggested by these guides is both natural and manufactured. Women were encouraged to eat sparingly, to maintain a graceful figure, but not too little lest they appear sickly. They were told to sleep flat on their backs to preserve posture, to chew fennel seeds for fresh breath, to walk with small steps. Even leisure time was structured around maintaining the body. Activities like embroidery weren't just hobbies, they reinforced ideals of delicacy, patience, stillness. A woman who could sit for hours stitching roses into linen was a woman in control of herself. But not all women lived by these books. You move deeper into the town and come across an apothecary. Inside, a midwife tends to a young woman, her belly rounded in the early stages of pregnancy. This body, too, tells a story. In medieval times, pregnancy was both sacred and perilous. A woman with child was praised for her fertility, but also reminded that her appearance must remain modest. Her cravings controlled her swelling, hidden under layers of cloth. Pregnancy reshaped the ideal again. Now, roundness was acceptable, but only temporarily, and only in the right places. A swollen belly, yes. Swollen ankles or blotchy skin, less desirable. The pressure didn't pause for motherhood. If anything, it intensified. You leave the apothecary and pass a group of boys tossing pebbles into the road. They're young, but already making remarks about the bodies they see, laughing, mocking, repeating the patterns they've absorbed. The ideal female body is already imprinted in their minds. They're being trained too, and you begin to wonder, did anyone truly fit the ideal? Or was it always just out of reach? You find your answer in an unlikely place, a small theater, tucked behind a tavern, where a traveling troupe is performing a morality play. The actors exaggerate every gesture, every costume. A beautiful woman enters, and the audience gasps. She is the embodiment of the ideal long hair, pale face, tightly belted waist. But then the devil appears, seducing her with flattery. Her beauty becomes her downfall. The message is clear: beauty tempts beauty, corrupts beauty, must be watched. And that's the cruel twist of the medieval ideal. Even when you achieved it, you weren't safe. You became a target. A woman who was too beautiful might be accused of vanity, of sorcery, of distracting men from their duty to God. The stakes weren't just social, they were mortal. You leave the theater with a heavy heart. So many women shaped themselves to match a mold they could never quite fit, only to be punished for fitting it too well. The moon hangs low now. The streets are emptying. You hear a lute playing softly behind a closed door, and somewhere a woman sings a lullaby. And you keep walking deeper into this quiet, aching history, where the ideal female body was a moving target, crafted by others, yet carried by women, who learned over time how to bear its weight with grace. The streets are nearly empty now, blanketed in silence and the silvery sheen of moonlight. You make your way past shuttered shops and locked gates, feeling the hum of a world asleep. But your mind is wide awake, still tangled in the countless images of the medieval female form. Soft and sacred, slender and sinful, pale and pure. The contradictions are endless, but they all come back to one central idea: control. You step into a quiet courtyard surrounded by high stone walls. A well sits in the center, its wooden bucket swaying gently in the breeze. You lower yourself onto the stone edge and look up at the stars, and suddenly you wonder, what did it feel like to live in a body that never truly belonged to you? To have your worth measured in inches and shadows and size. A door creaks open nearby. A woman steps out, wrapped in a plain cloak. Her face is lined with age, her hair silvered at the edges. She walks with the slow confidence of someone who no longer performs for anyone. And in her, you glimpse something rare in this time ownership. She has lived long enough to outgrow the ideal, to shed it. And in doing so, she has become something else entirely real. She sees you sitting and joins you without a word, her hands folded in her lap. For a long time you sit together in silence. Then she speaks, her voice low and steady. "They told me once I was beautiful," she says. "Too beautiful. So I hid it. Then they said I was not beautiful enough, so I tried harder." She chuckles softly. "Then they said I tried too hard." She shakes her head. "No matter what I did, my body was never just mine. It was a mirror for their fears, their dreams, their rules." Her words settle into the air like falling ash. And you realize something you hadn't before, that the ideal female body wasn't about what women wanted. It was about what others needed women to be. Men needed her to be soft, to soothe their rage. The church needed her to be modest, to keep temptation at bay. Society needed her to be fertile, to carry its future. And women. They learned to need those things too, if only to survive. You look around the courtyard and imagine it filled not just with women who fit the mold, but with those who didn't. The freckled girls, the loud ones, the tall, broad-shouldered farmers' daughters, the women with scars from childbirth, the widows with bowed backs and tired eyes. None of them made it into the paintings. But they were there. They lived. They carried the world forward on their backs and in their bellies. And in the spaces where the ideal failed to capture them, they created something else reality. You pass beneath an archway, now emerging into the town square where statues stand cold and immobile. They are mostly men, but here and there you see the stone form of a sainted woman. Each figure is slender, cloaked chin, lowered in submission. You know these were not likenesses. They were messages. This is what goodness looks like. This is what you must become. And yet you can't help but feel the resistance underneath. Even in the lines of the stone, you see the hand of a sculptor who had to choose how much curve, how much expression, how much body to leave beneath the folds. You wander now toward the outskirts of the town, where the homes grow sparse and the land stretches wide. The hills roll under the stars, dark and endless. Here the ideal loses its grip. There are no mirrors, no tailors, no watchful glares. Just you, the wind, and the memory of 1,000 women who lived through expectations they never asked for. You imagine them walking here barefoot, laughing unburdened by belts or bindings or beauty prayers. You imagine a world where no girl was told to shrink, where no woman feared her reflection, where the ideal wasn't something to be worn, but something to be released. The wind whispers through the grass. A single owl calls in the dark. And you realize as you sit on that hillside that the medieval female body was not just a product of its time. It was a prophecy. It told a story of what women were allowed to be and what they still fight to reclaim. You close your eyes and listen to the silence, to the softness, to the shape of something that was never truly theirs, but always somehow carried with strength anyway. And you continue onward deeper still, because this story is far from over. The wind grows cooler as you descend the far side of the hill, your steps soft against the dew-laced earth. Ahead of you lies a small hamlet nestled in a fold of the land like a forgotten thought. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. Somewhere a dog barks once and goes quiet. And as you approach the village, the hush of night seems to settle even deeper into your bones. You step past a stable, its doors slightly ajar. Inside, a young woman tends to a restless mare. Her sleeves are rolled up, her fingers calloused, her cheeks smudged with dust. But she moves with grace, a kind that doesn't come from etiquette lessons or posture drills, but from the rhythm of a life lived in motion. You watch her pat the horse's flank, murmur something gentle, and then wipe her hands on her apron. She doesn't know you're watching. She isn't performing. And in that unguarded moment, you see a kind of beauty no painter ever captured. The farther you get from castles and cathedrals, the more the ideal begins to fray. Out here, beauty isn't wrapped in velvet or pressed into prayer books. It lives in cracked knuckles and sunburnt shoulders and the deep lines that come from squinting into the wind. It's a beauty built not for admiration, but for endurance. And yet even in these outlying places, the ideals still trickled in, drifting through sermons, traveling on merchant wagons, slipping into lullabies and old wives' tales. A girl might never see a noblewoman up close, but she'd still be told to keep her voice down, to walk with small steps, to mind her manners, if she hoped to marry well. The ideal female body, no matter how distant, cast a long shadow. You find yourself drawn toward a cottage where an old woman sits on a low stool by the fire, combing her granddaughter's hair. The child fidgets, half asleep, but the woman hums softly, her hands steady. She tells stories as she works of queens with milk-white skin, of maidens, with eyes like spring rain, of enchantresses so lovely they could stop a war. The little girl listens wide-eyed, and somewhere in her gaze you see the beginnings of a question. Will I be like that? Should I be like that? This is how the ideal survives, not just through art or religion, but through bedtime tales and casual comments. Through the smile someone gives when a girl looks dainty, or the frown when she's too loud. The messages are subtle, but they take root early, wrapping around the spine like invisible stays, teaching young women how to hold themselves, how to shrink themselves, how to become palatable. You move past the cottage into a field where three sisters gather herbs under the moonlight. They laugh as they walk, one swinging her basket, another twirling a sprig of sage between her fingers. Their bodies are wildly different, one tall and lean, another short and stout, the third curvy and strong. Yet each moves with a confidence that seems to challenge the old rules. You hear their laughter unfiltered and free, and realize that here perhaps is a new kind of ideal. One that doesn't silence, reshape, or shame, but simply allows. You follow the edge of a creek, the water whispering beside you like a secret. On its banks, someone has carved initials into the bark of a tree surrounded by a heart. The marks are crude but tender, and it hits you true affection rarely concerns itself with ideals. Lovers in secret corners, mothers in birthing rooms, sisters in kitchens, they love bodies that are real. Bodies that bleed, that ache, that laugh until they snort. No stained glass, no marble perfection, just life. You cross a small bridge and pause halfway, leaning against the rail. You think of how many women stood here before you, wondering if they measured up. Wondering if anyone would see them as worthy not just for marriage or motherhood, but for being. And how many of them realized too late that the ideal was never about them. It was about control, about containment. Because the ideal female body in the Middle Ages didn't just define beauty, it defined obedience. A body that was modest was easier to control. A body that was quiet didn't argue. A body that was frail needed protection. A body that was never quite good enough stayed focused on self-improvement instead of self-expression. And still, women carved out joy. They danced barefoot at harvest festivals. They skinny dipped in secret streams. They dressed up for no reason at all. They told bawdy jokes, exchanged knowing glances, and winked at the world from behind their veils. They found ways to exist beyond the mold, even if just for a moment. The stars above you are brighter now, unobscured by walls or windows. You lie back in the grass and let your body rest, your real, imperfect, irreplaceable body, and you wonder what it would have been like to grow up under those medieval ideals, how you would have been praised or punished, what you would have hidden, what you might have learned to celebrate in secret. And with that thought, your journey stretches forward once more deeper into the layers, the contradictions, and the unspoken truths of a time when beauty was both blessing and burden, and a woman's body carried the weight of far more than just flesh. You wake before the sun. The sky is still a deep violet, and the air carries the chill of dew-soaked grass. As you walk toward the rising horizon, it feels like the world is paused between breaths. This in-between moment between darkness and day, between stillness and sound, mirrors the strange limbo in which medieval women lived. Their bodies ever present, ever watched, but their voices rarely heard. Ahead lies a small shrine at the crossroads, a weathered statue of the Virgin, tucked into a stone alcove. You stop before her, this carved icon of holiness, her expression eternal and unknowable. Her body once again is idealized, a gentle swell of bosom-veiled hair, long tapering hands folded in prayer. She is beauty made sacred, but only through suffering and surrender. The ideal female body here is not alive but fossilized in virtue, still unchanging, unreachable. And yet, women were never still. You turn down the eastern road where the village is beginning to stir. Roosters call, doors creak open, and feet shuffle across dirt paths. A miller's wife walks past you, arms loaded with cloth. Her gait is swift, her jaw clenched. Her back curves not in submission, but in fatigue. She's given birth to 6 children. Her hips are broad, her belly soft. The local priest might not call her body ideal, but it has brought life into the world, fed it, held it close through fevers and winters. She's strong, and strength was rarely part of the ideal, but it was part of survival. As you follow her path toward the river, you begin to see how much of the medieval ideal relied on a strange illusion that the female body existed only to be seen, not to act. Yet in every village and hall, it was women's bodies doing the real work, kneading bread, nursing wounds, harvesting flax, carrying wood. The ideal floated above them like a cloud they were expected to reflect, but never touch. You step onto a wooden dock where 2 fisherwomen are unloading their catch. They wear plain tunics soaked to the knees, sleeves rolled past their elbows. Their banter is brisk, unfiltered. One of them catches you looking and laughs. "Not what you expected," she teases. "No corsets, no painted cheeks," you shake your head. "Good," she says. "We don't need any of that to be worth something." And suddenly you feel the weight of centuries pushing back against those words. Because for hundreds of years, worth was measured differently. In marriage markets, a woman's appearance was scrutinized like livestock. Eyes too close, unlucky. Hips too narrow. Unfit. A widow might be dismissed entirely regardless of her beauty. A noble woman past childbearing age might vanish from view altogether, no longer useful, no longer ideal. And yet women kept becoming, growing older, stronger, more complicated. They were never just the maidens from poems or the mothers from statues. They were messy, emotional, witty, exhausted, brilliant. But the ideal had no room for that. It was a narrow doorway, and most real bodies didn't fit through. You return to town just as the marketplace opens. Baskets overflow with root vegetables and dried herbs. A noble carriage rolls past, its curtains drawn tight. Inside, you catch a brief glimpse of a girl, perhaps 15, painted pale, bound at the waist, posture rigid. She is perfectly dressed, perfectly silent. Her eyes find yours for just a moment before the curtain falls. You feel it in your gut, the weight she carries. The pressure to embody a standard she didn't choose, probably doesn't understand, but has been groomed to chase. She is the ideal, but only for now. Because in time, the ideal will move again. You see it in the fashion scrolls pinned to a stall. A new silhouette trending. A new standard whispering its way from court to countryside. Bodies that once fit the mold now fall outside of it. And so the chase continues. That's the cruelest part. The ideal always moves. It adjusts just enough to keep women trying. To keep them buying salves and fasting for days, and praying for clearer skin, or smaller hands, or gentler features. The ideal promises approval, but it thrives on dissatisfaction. You stop beside a well and glance down at your reflection in the rippling surface. And for a fleeting second, you imagine being a medieval woman. Would you tie your belt tighter, powder your cheeks with ground eggshell? Sit still and smile small, or would you break the rules? Would you go barefaced and barefoot into a world that wanted you silent? The well reflects the sky above you. Now clouds stretching thin across pale light. And you realize something powerful. The ideal female body in the Middle Ages was not a single shape, but a story. One told over and over. But stories can be rewritten. And even back then, some women found ways to revise the tale. They built new chapters through work, through resistance, through laughter shared in kitchens, and secrets passed between sisters. They carved freedom into corners the ideal forgot to guard. And so you keep walking. The town awakens fully behind you, and the trail ahead is long, winding toward the truths still hidden south at the layers of lace, linen, and expectation. The sun climbs higher as you follow the road that threads out of the village and winds through open countryside. Golden fields stretch in every direction, dotted with haystacks and meandering sheep. You walk slowly, your pace unrushed, your thoughts heavy with everything you've seen. And yet there is still so much left to uncover, because the story of the ideal female body in medieval times doesn't just belong to the rich or the rural. It extends into legend, into law, into medicine and mythology. And some of the most lasting ideals weren't written by women at all, but by the men who feared, desired, and attempted to define them. You arrive at the stone ruins of an old university building. Its lecture halls long emptied its walls, now carpeted with ivy. In the Middle Ages, universities were centers of thought, but women weren't allowed inside. They were studied, debated, written about, but rarely heard. Their bodies became subjects of philosophy, theology, and early science shaped by ideas rather than lived experience. You step over a threshold and into the echo of a classroom. A ghost of a professor stands at the lectern. Quoting Aristotle, "The female is, as it were, a deformed male." And just like that, you feel the chill of how deeply these ideas ran. The female body was seen not as a thing of its own, but a lesser version of something else. Passive, porous, prone to imbalance. In medicine, women were believed to be ruled by their wombs, moody, unpredictable, and requiring male oversight. Every strange quirk of the female body, bleeding softness, curves, birth, was turned into a problem, to be solved, a flaw to be managed. Women were often believed to be physically colder, morally weaker, and spiritually more tempting than men. It wasn't just superstition, it was science, or what passed for it. And this so-called science shaped everything. You walk past old shelves where parchment texts still sit, their pages warped by time. One book details how a woman's hot humors might lead to hysteria. Another offers recipes to tighten the womb and lessen the flesh, written by men who never menstruated or bore children, but who nonetheless dictated how women should treat their bodies. In the margin of one manuscript, a note catches your eye, scrawled in softer, smaller handwriting, likely a student's. It reads, "If beauty is divine, why must it wound us so?" You close the book slowly. Even in male-dominated halls, someone had started to wonder. You exit the ruins and step into a nearby meadow, where a traveling troupe of actors is rehearsing. The play is an old morality tale, a noblewoman tempted by vanity, punished by fate. The actress in the role wears a flowing gown and a golden wig. Her gestures are exaggerated. She preens, pouts, swoons, and the crowd laughs, then gasps, then nods when she's struck down by divine punishment. This trope was common beauty as downfall. A woman who enjoyed her looks was asking for trouble. If she flaunted her figure, disaster would surely follow. In folk tales, witches were often described as once beautiful women who had grown bitter with age. Ugliness became a mark of evil, just as beauty could signal either virtue or danger, depending on how it was used. So women were trapped. They had to be beautiful, but not too beautiful. Visible, but not too visible. Fertile, but not too fertile. The boundaries were tight, and punishment for slipping outside them came fast, if not from the law, then from rumor, ostracism, or even the church. You sit now by a small river that curls around a cluster of old stones, what's left of a women's court, where disputes were once settled. A record from the time speaks of a girl punished for wearing her girdle too tightly, another for coloring her cheeks with beet juice. Their crimes disrupting modesty, drawing attention, trying to control the way they were seen. But beneath these punishments was a deeper fear that women might reclaim the power of their appearance for themselves, that they might use beauty not as a mirror for men's desires, but as armor, as weapon, as identity. And some did. You walk now into the tent of a healer, a woman whose knowledge surpasses that of the monks, though she would never claim it aloud. She shows you roots and flowers that help with swelling tinctures to bring a glow to the skin oils to soothe labor pains. She treats women of all shapes and ages, none of them perfect, all of them sacred in their imperfections. She tells you a secret in a whisper. The body always knows, even when the world forgets it. You leave her tent with that truth burning like a quiet ember in your chest. Because the ideal female body in the Middle Ages wasn't just shaped by fashion art or medicine, it was haunted by mythology. Women were angels or temptresses, maidens or mothers, pure or ruined. There was no in-between, no room for real breathing, contradictory, evolving women. And yet, they lived anyway. They slipped through the cracks in the stories. They loved and lost and aged and laughed and worked their hands raw and gave birth and buried their dead and danced when no one was watching. Their bodies may not have matched the ideal, but they carved new definitions every day, definitions too messy to fit in textbooks, too powerful to erase. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting the fields in amber light, you take a deep breath and feel the weight of that legacy settle in. These weren't just women bound by expectation. They were survivors, subverters, silent revolutionaries who walked with straight backs and fierce eyes, even when the world demanded meekness. And their story continues with every step forward, through the grass, through the dusk, through the long, echoing corridor of history. The sun now hangs low in the sky, stretching golden fingers across the landscape, casting long, soft shadows. The day is fading, but your journey is far from over. You walk a quiet path lined with elder trees, their branches swaying, as if nodding to the thousands of women who have passed beneath them. With each step, the weight of what you've learned settles a little deeper into your bones, that the ideal female body in medieval times was not just about appearance, it was about order control and deeply rooted fear. You pause at a wayside cross its wooden form, worn by centuries of weather and prayer. Carved into the beam are faint initials, evidence of a woman who once stood here, maybe alone, maybe desperate, maybe defiant. And it strikes you again how often the female body was seen as a site of morality. If a woman sinned, her body bore the blame. If she suffered, her body was to be purified. If she flourished, her body was a reward or a temptation or both. You sit on a rock nearby as a procession passes on the road below. A young bride, her hair covered by a sheer veil, rides on a white mule led by her family. Her gown is heavily embroidered, her waist cinched beneath a jeweled girdle. The village watches from the sides of the path, whispering judgments as she passes about the roundness of her cheeks, the softness of her jaw, the quietness of her demeanor. Her body is the centerpiece of the ceremony, but her voice is never heard. It reminds you of something you've seen over and over again, women celebrated for their form, but silenced in their function. A beautiful woman might adorn a tapestry, but never design one. She might inspire a poem, but never write it. She might be painted in brilliant detail, but her thoughts were left unwritten. And yet the cracks in the system were always there. You recall the story of Christine de Pizan, a 14th century writer who openly challenged these ideals. She praised women's intellect and decried the male poets who wrote them as nothing more than objects of lust or ridicule. She argued loudly publicly that a woman's value went far beyond her body. That beauty was not the sum of virtue, that ideals were not truths. Her courage wasn't the norm, but it was contagious. You stand and follow the road into a small village gathering. A midsummer festival is underway. Children chase each other through crowds, musicians pluck out cheerful tunes, and women young and old dance in circles around a bonfire. Their bodies don't match the saints or the statues or the stitched silhouettes in noble gowns. Some are stout, some slender, some freckled or flushed or faded with time. And yet they move with something close to joy. They're not dancing to be admired. They're dancing to exist. You watch a group of older women peel apples and share stories. One talks about a birth gone wrong. Another remembers when she was praised for her tiny hands. Another laughs about the way her husband used to call her sojourned as a barrel sweet as a peach. There's no shame in their voices now. They've outlived the need to perform. Their bodies may no longer be ideal, but they are still theirs. You step closer to the fire and listen to a young girl being taught how to carry herself. Back straight, her aunt says. Chin low. Smile when spoken to. The girl tries, but her eyes flick toward the dancers. Her feet want to move differently. Her body has not yet settled into the mold, and maybe it never will. Because the ideal was never meant to fit everyone. It was meant to exclude, to separate the worthy from the unwanted, the saint from the sinner, the bride from the servant. And that's what made it so powerful. It wasn't just about beauty, it was about belonging. And yet despite that pressure, despite that constant tension, women still carved out joy. They stitched it into their embroidery. They buried it in songs. They passed it down in recipes and riddles and stories told while braiding hair. They whispered new rules to each other while pretending to ultraum the old ones. You move through the crowd, past the musicians and vendors and firelight, until you reach the edge of the field. The world has dimmed to blue and gold. Now the sky softening, the stars beginning to blink awake. And in this fading light, the female form begins to blur, not into invisibility, but into freedom. Because when the light is low and the watchers are gone, the ideals lose their grip. A woman alone in a field can stretch her arms wide, run without caution, shout into the wind. No one will judge her gait or her hair or her hips. For a moment, her body is just a body again, a vessel of breath, a home, a defiant, sacred, imperfect truth. You lie down in the tall grass and close your eyes, and as the drums beat faintly behind you, you realize that the ideal was never real. It was an illusion, powerful, yes, but never complete. The real story was always messier, louder, braver. It was in the gaps, the contradictions, the acts of resistance hidden in plain sight. And you, drifting gently into sleep beneath the stars, carry that story forward. One breath at a time. The stars stretch across the sky, now shimmering in the ink-blue canopy above. The festival music fades behind you, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind through leaves. You follow a narrow path lit only by moonlight, your feet crunching softly on gravel, your thoughts deepening. Each step draws you further from the noise of society, from its rules and rituals, and closer to something quieter, something closer to truth. You reach a crumbled stone wall, once a boundary for a noble estate, now forgotten. Ivy weaves through the cracks, and on the other side is a small garden, wild and untamed. A fig tree leans toward the moon, and lavender bushes spill over the path. This place feels different. Sacred, but not in the church-sanctioned way. It whispers of women who walked here long ago, not as saints or seductresses, but simply as themselves. You kneel in the grass, fingers brushing over herbs planted generations ago, and you imagine the women who once tended this space, gathering sage for tea, yarrow for wounds, mugwort for dreaming. Their bodies didn't fit the ideal. Their beauty wasn't praised in songs, but here they were powerful. And you realize there was always an undercurrent, a quiet resistance running beneath the surface of the ideal. In the whispered prayers not spoken in Latin, in the tucked-away diaries, the coded recipes, the hand-me-down cures. Women passed more than their genes, they passed secrets, about healing, about survival, about being whole in a world that only wanted parts. You think of a mother teaching her daughter how to brew rose water, not just to brighten her skin, but to feel worthy. Of a widow saving scraps of silk to sew herself something beautiful. Of a midwife who hummed lullabies as she delivered yet another child in the dark. Their bodies were never just vessels, they were archives. You rise and make your way back to the path, walking slowly now. The night presses close, but not unkindly, and ahead you spot a figure, just a shadow at first. A woman barefoot standing in the shallows of a lake. Her dress clings to her legs, her arms lifted to the sky. She looks like a statue, but she's moving, breathing alive. She does not perform. She does not hide. And in her posture, you see everything. The ideal tried to erase freedom, power, presence. This woman is not confined to the poses of tapestries or the margins of manuscripts. She claims the space she stands in, and she does not ask permission. You sit by the lake and watch her for a long time, the reflection of the moon fractured on the water's surface. And as you listen to the lapping waves, you realize something important. The ideal female body wasn't just about shape. It was about stillness. A woman was supposed to remain frozen in her role, pretty pale, passive. But women moved anyway. They labored, they birthed, they mourned, they aged. Their bodies bore scars, sagged with time, bore the weight of grief and joy alike. They expanded and contracted with the seasons of their lives, no two alike. And that movement, that life was never captured in the static outlines of the ideal. You leave the lake with that knowledge humming in your chest. The road leads you past a field where wild horses graze in the dark. One looks up startled, then resumes eating. You marvel at its ease, its naturalness. No one expects a horse to be slimmer or taller or quieter or prettier. It simply is. And for a brief aching moment you wonder what it would have been like to be a woman in the Middle Ages and simply be without comparison, without shame, without reshaping yourself to suit someone else's fantasy. But even then, even back then, some women managed it. They were the ones who laughed too loudly, who let their bellies soften with age, who refused to marry, who told stories that didn't end in weddings, who carved their initials into trees and weren't sorry for it. The ones who refused to make themselves smaller. They didn't break the system, but they cracked it. And through those cracks, the light of something else began to shine. You walk a little taller now, your own shadow stretching beside you. Because you're not just learning history, you're listening to it breathe. To every heartbeat, every step, every whispered no that kept the real story alive. And the night, vast and velvet, welcomes you onward into the final pieces of the tale where the ideals begin to fall away and the truth of the body begins at last to speak for itself. The air is cooler now, laced with the hush of midnight. As you walk deeper into the forest path, away from the lanterns and laughter of village life, the night seems to draw you inward, not just through the trees, but into the marrow of the story itself. The further you go, the clearer it becomes. The ideal female body in medieval times was never really about beauty. It was about silence. But silence, you've learned, isn't absence. It's pressure. It's weight. It's a stillness that demands constant upkeep. You come upon a clearing where moonlight pools across a circle of stones, an old meeting place long forgotten. You sit in the center, surrounded by the soft hum of crickets, and imagine the women who once gathered here. Not to gossip or sew, but to speak freely when no one else was listening. What would they say if they knew someone was still asking? Maybe they'd begin by telling you how tiring it was to live beneath the gaze, how even among other women judgment clung to every gesture, the way you sat, the way you breathed. If your ankles showed beneath your gown, if your skin flushed too brightly. Even the act of growing older became suspicious. In a culture that glorified the youthful, untouched maiden and then demanded motherhood, there was no safe space between those two states. And once you passed through them into age, into wisdom, you became invisible. Unless, of course, they feared you. And this is where the story sharpens. Because when women stepped outside the ideal, not too far, just enough, they stopped being praised and started being punished. You recall the laws, the records, the burnings, midwives accused of witchcraft, widows accused of theft, women who didn't bend their backs low enough when serving, or who read too much, or who dared to speak plainly in public. Often they were described as unfeminine, their bodies too large, their voices too loud, their presence disruptive. The farther a woman strayed from the passive, pliant ideal, the more dangerous she became. So the ideal wasn't just a set of aesthetic guidelines, it was a leash. A beautiful woman who kept quiet was praised. A beautiful woman who spoke became a threat. And an unbeautiful woman who challenged anything at all. She was cast out, sometimes literally. She was ridiculed or worse, turned into a warning for other girls. But even in these dark corners of history, there's something luminous. Because despite the punishment, the narrowing roles, the rigid expectations, women still found ways to embody their truth. You see it in their letters, their marginal notes, their recipes, their superstitions, in the charms they wore under their bodices, in the way they preserved each other's stories in whispered form long after the scribes refused to write them down. You lie back against the earth now, the stone beneath you, still warm from the day's sun, and you imagine your body, the one you live in now, transported into that world. How quickly it would be scrutinized, how easily it could be labeled, ranked, misunderstood. But then you ask yourself something harder. Would you have conformed? Would you have powdered your face with crushed bone, pulled your waist tighter each morning, bit your lips before walking into a room just to seem a little more alive, maybe? Maybe not. But the real question is, at what cost? You look up through the trees, the stars crowding the sky like thousands of watchful eyes, and realize that the cost wasn't just external. The cost was internal. It was the quiet erosion of self. To chase the ideal was to erase the parts of you that didn't fit. And yet, despite it all, the unideal parts, the strong parts, the loud parts, the soft, scarred, aging parts survived. Because the body in the end tells its own truth. It bears witness. It remembers. You think now of the women who bore 10 children and buried 6, who had crooked teeth and called it a family trait, who tied on their aprons and sang with cracked voices, who braided their hair not for beauty, but to keep it out of the way while they worked, who aged past usefulness and became something else free. You rise slowly from the circle of stones and start walking again. The forest clears, and ahead is a small cottage, candlelight glowing through the window. You step to the door. Inside, an elderly woman sits alone spinning flax. Her back is bent, her fingers stained, her cheeks weathered like bark. But her eyes are sharp as flint. She meets your gaze, and without speaking, you understand she knows. She has known the ideal. She has played the part. And then when no one was looking, she stepped out of it. Her body has become something more than a shape or a symbol. It has become a story. And as you walk back into the darkness, the candlelight behind you, you realize that's what all bodies are in the end, stories. Not statues, not poses, not perfection, just lives written in flesh. And the ideal, it was always fiction. But the women, they were real, and they are still speaking. The night has grown thick and velvety as you reach the final stretch of your journey. You step onto an old footpath bordered by hedgerows and wildflowers now folded in sleep. There's a silence here, not the heavy silence of suppression, but the sacred kind. The kind that invites reflection. You've walked through centuries of expectation, judgment, worship, and rebellion, all written into the female form. And now, as the moon begins its slow descent, you finally arrive at the truth hiding beneath it all. You approach a quiet graveyard on a hill, the stones leaning gently with time. Some are marked with crosses, others worn smooth by centuries of rain. You walk slowly among them, reading names you'll never pronounce correctly, dates long buried beneath lichen and moss. And then you pause before a stone half buried in the earth. There's no epitaph, only a carved symbol of a woman's face, her features gentle, weathered, ordinary. This, you realize, is the face of most medieval women. Not the icons, not the muses, not the warnings in sermons or the heroines in poetry. Just a woman. Someone who loved, worried, endured. Someone whose body changed with the seasons, grew softened, scarred, bore children, survived famine, aged. Her body never fit the ideal. Few ever did. But she lived anyway. She had to. You sit beside her stone, letting your thoughts slow. You remember the noble women who powdered their skin with lead and tightened belts to create the illusion of grace. You remember the peasant girls judged by the strength of their hands and the roundness of their hips. You remember the cloistered nuns who denied their flesh, and the barmaids who used theirs like armor. You remember the midwives, the outcasts, the rebels, the daughters, who learned to stand still because the world never wanted them to move. And through it all, the body kept changing, bleeding, feeding, breaking, healing, carrying, failing, remembering. The female body wasn't just a vessel in the Middle Ages. It was a battlefield, a burden, a currency, a prayer. But most of all, it was a paradox, celebrated and censored, adored and feared, shaped and erased, never quite belonging to the woman who lived inside it. But now, here in the quiet, you see what the paintings and prayers never captured. Beneath every ideal was a real person, and beneath every pressure was persistence. Because women didn't just survive the weight of the ideal, they transformed under it. They found ways to be beautiful in spite of it, because of it, outside of it. They laughed in kitchens, danced barefoot at night, kissed without permission, aged without apology. They wrote stories with their lissus, even when they weren't allowed to write anything else. And now, as the stars begin to fade, and the sky softens with the approach of dawn, you understand the ideal never truly mattered. What mattered were the women who lived around it, beneath it, beyond it. You stand slowly, one last look at the nameless stone. It feels less like an end, more like a beginning. Because though the Middle Ages are gone, the echoes remain. The ideal female body still shifts in the hands of culture and commerce, but so do the voices pushing back. Every scar tells a story. Every curve holds history. Every body then and now is worthy of more than imitation. It's worthy of truth. And so you begin your walk back through the fields, through the hush of memory and the hush of dawn. Not toward the past, but through it and beyond it. So now let your breathing slow. Let your body, exactly as it is, sink deeper into stillness. There's nothing you need to change. No part of you that must become something else to be worthy. No angle that must be softened. No voice that must be quieted. You are not a reflection in someone else's mirror. You are not a canvas for someone else's idea. You are not here to fit into an ideal shaped by centuries of fear and fantasy. You are here to be, to rest, to release. Imagine a soft golden thread unwinding from the base of your spine, trailing down through your legs, anchoring you gently to the earth. Feel the pull of gravity not as a weight, but as an embrace. Let your hands soften, your shoulders fall. Let your face, so expressive, so singular, be free of performance. You are not a statue. You are not a painting. You are not a prayer whispered by someone else's lips. You are real, and that is enough. Let the echoes of the story you've just traveled dissolve into quiet. Let the names fade, the faces drift into mist. The roads of memory grow still. Let yourself be carried now, not by the weight of history, but by the softness of rest. Inhale. Exhale. The world is quiet. You are safe. You are whole. You are free.